even though interest rates are going up right now, people are still buying homes. And so I want to transition from that to consumer spending and inflation. Inflation's been going up at a historic rate. You look at consumer prices that have rose 8.5% from a year ago in March, according to Labor Department data. And just like in the housing market where people are still continuing to spend money despite the rising prices, consumers are still spending more for goods and services. How long is that going to last? And so joining me right now is a consumer marketing strategist. Her name is Lisa W. Miller. She's a consultant with decades of experience studying consumers. And Lisa, welcome into the program today.
Thank you so much, Brandon.
So before we get into all of the consumer spending and some of what I brought you in for, I know you're based out of Dallas, but you've got a very strong connection here to the Lafayette area. I just want to give you a couple minutes to be able to talk about the legacy that your mom and dad left behind in this area.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So Lafayette is definitely near and dear to my heart. My brother lived there for about 20 years. And then my mom and dad moved there in 2007, and so proud of all that they did. For those listeners out there, so my mom was actually one of the founders of the Lafayette Farmers Market as part of, Munkus Park, and was the chairman of the board. And, I've been down there, got to ring that bell in Lafayette at the Farmers Market. So it's just such a joyful thing. Mm-hmm. And then my dad, his passion was really about water conservation. Mm-hmm. And so he was the one that kind of spearheaded the Bio-Vermilion Preservation Association. And I know one thing that they were so proud of back in 2014 was they were awarded, the conservation organization by the Louisiana Wildlife Federation. And so they always lived by that motto: leave it cleaner than you found it, leave it better than they found it. So they really had a servant heart and, really, I think, left a legacy there in Lafayette. So
yeah,
it's a love coming to Lafayette.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Well, in Lafayette right now, we are celebrating Festival International, and we've got gorgeous weather to do it under. And, Lafayette doing very well right now, and in part to your parents and what they did in this area. So definitely wanted you to be able to talk about that for a few minutes before we got into the topic. So, okay, consumers.
Well, thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. So consumer spending, as I mentioned at the top, people, the prices of everything is going up. And that's not just groceries at the grocery stores. It's, goods and services. It's vehicles, it's homes. It's things that some of them people need, some of them people want. Tell us the trends of what you're seeing, because this is something that you study. I mean, you complete these surveys, you get a pulse with people for, their spending habits and what they're doing with their money. Tell us what you're seeing.
Yeah, and thank you. So we have been tracking, it's a project I called The Journey Back to Joy. And I actually started this project, March of 2020 when COVID started, and I've been literally collecting data since then, 46,000 consumers over the last couple of years. But it's kind of pivoting now. COVID, there are people that are still concerned about that. But when it comes to inflation, what the data is showing us, and it's very recent data just from last week, is there's this interesting thing about when inflation is at all-time high, a 40-year high, people have to make choices. Mm-hmm. So our data is showing there's a splurge. So we asked them, what do you want to spend your money on now versus what do you want to put off till prices might come down? Mm-hmm. And what they want to spend money on now is like clothes and apparel, maybe a little splurge. It's vacations are coming. People might be going back to work. We're maybe tired of sitting in loungewear and shorts at home. Mm-hmm. And so, Americans want to buy clothes and apparel before the prices go up. But the other thing, Brandon, that's so interesting is that the other side of it is something very practical, because consumers, we want to get our cars repaired. With people haven't been driving as much, maybe maintenance was put off a little bit. And so a lot of Americans say, I better get that car fixed now before prices go up more. Right. So those are the things that people want to spend money on now.
So I'll be honest with you, the car thing definitely resonates with me as far as repairs, because, we had I would say it was kind of during the pandemic. There was a couple things that we had talked with the mechanic about that needed to be fixed, but it didn't need to be fixed like right then and there. And knowing that we weren't doing a lot of traveling, not just because of the pandemic, but also because, we have two babies that are very, very young, and we weren't going to be ready to start bringing them out and about more until a few months later. So we're able to hold off on a couple of those. Well, now, very recently we've, decided we're going to start doing a little bit more traveling. As a matter of fact, we're going to take, we're going to be taking our babies to Galveston, to Moody Gardens real soon. And so because we're doing that, we went ahead and get those, those repairs that our mechanic suggested to us to get done. We went and did those, because, hey, we want to make sure that, the vehicle is safe for when we're all getting out on the road with our little babies and such. So I can definitely identify with that, with the car situation, because, that was something that wasn't as much of a need during COVID. But now that we're starting to drive more, and now that we're starting to get out with the kids more, okay, well, hey, now it's something that we have to do. So, we addressed it when we started to pick back up on the traveling again.
Absolutely. And first of all, I grew up in Houston, been to Moody Gardens, and it's beautiful.
Oh,
so
it is.
I think you guys will have a wonderful time there.
Yeah.
But it's interesting. I wonder if you guys might buy some clothes before you go take that vacation.
Yes.
So,
well, look, my wife came in last night with like 2 or 3 new bathing suits just for my daughter alone. So, yeah, we're definitely spending on the clothes.
So you are very much that same thing. So those things go together, right? I've got to get my car fixed, and we all like to have a few new things when we go on vacation. So, but that makes a lot of sense. And what's interesting is on the other side of the equation, though, is that there are, things that people do want to put off until prices come down. And interestingly, buying a home was one of the things that at least our national survey data had said that, it is actually, 19% said I'm going to wait. Versus 5% saying I want to do it now before prices go up even further. So a lot of Americans are going to maybe put that dream home back on hold, and then remodel is kind of the same place. Yeah. But then buying a car was obviously the other one. We know, we've all experienced it, is, buying a car is so expensive. And even a used car, not in my lifetime did a used car go up in value versus when you bought it. It's just crazy. So, but the other thing about those items, we've been trained as consumers that those things come down in price. They're elastic. Home prices go up, home prices come down. The used car prices probably come down. New cars, maybe not as much. But, when it comes to restaurants and clothes, prices never go back down. Once they come back up, they're staying. And with, then people might discount them or do sales. But retail and restaurant prices, they don't go up and down. They just go up.
Oh, yeah. One thing I wanted to ask you was about restaurants. And are y'all seeing people start to go back out more like you thought they may have coming out of the pandemic, starting to go back out to those restaurants, or are people kind of pulling back on that?
Well, it's interesting. I was just on a webinar yesterday with some restaurant industry people, and basically there is a pretty good chunk, almost half of Americans say they're back to their normal frequency or even higher frequency going to restaurants versus the pandemic. But on the other side, there's still about half that say, yeah, I'm going out, but just not as often. And what's so fascinating is the reasons are it's just not, air quote, worth it anymore. And worth it goes beyond price. It's certainly inflation is a big part of it, but, their favorite item might not be there. Restaurants are short-staffed, and so you have to wait longer. And so it's just not as joyful. It's just a different experience than before the pandemic. So there's still, restaurants have made huge recovery, since last year, but there's still a ways to go.
We're speaking with Lisa Miller. She is a consultant, and she is someone who really studies the trends of what, consumers are buying, and especially now as we talk about consumer prices rising so much as we're dealing with all of this inflation, doing a lot of what she's been talking with us about, right, Lisa? Doing a lot of surveying and getting a feel for what people are doing with their money.
Absolutely, yes. And basically what I do for a living is talk to consumers and find out what their needs and wants are, what the pain points are to help companies grow. So that's what I do.
So as you've been talking to consumers and people are kind of reassessing things as we're putting COVID in our rearview mirror, what are you finding people are starting to prioritize their money? What are you finding people are starting to do in that regard?
Well, I think, as we were just talking about, people are going to have to make choices when, dollars are limited. We all have to just make choices about how we want to spend our money. And one of the things that's interesting is that 35 million households basically this tax season got less tax refund or lower tax refund because the child tax credit they got that money last year. Yeah. So there's a lot of, not only is inflation high, but for some Americans, maybe some of your listeners, maybe their tax refunds that they usually get this time of year maybe weren't there or much lower. So again, people are having to make choices. And I think what's interesting is the data just does show us is that given the last 2 years, we all need a little joy in our life. And so what I would encourage, listeners to do is, yes, we all have to take care of, the basics and all of the necessities that we need to do. But I would encourage everybody to find a little joy, whether it's going to a movie, just going to a restaurant, whatever makes you joyful, make sure to leave room in your budget for that because we all just need that right now, given the last 2 years that we've lived through.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. I mean, it's easy to put things that give us joy at the bottom of the priority list, but to keep going, especially in tough economic times, you got to have some happiness and you have to have something that gives you motivation to just keep on fighting sometimes.
Right. And it's, we're social creatures and, we've been locked up, pent up, quarantined, isolated, all of this really the language of COVID has just been so negative. Yeah. And to be able to get back to living, we really do need to find joy. And there could be, maybe it's just going to the park and having a picnic, just find something. And in Lafayette, as we were saying, there's so many, the farmer's market, Monkish Park, there's so many ways to find joy in Lafayette. And so I would just encourage people to do that. And of course, supporting the local businesses there, will help the economy as well and provide jobs.
What would you say to people who are kind of still sitting on the fence when it comes to some of these purchases that we've talked about, looking and they're sitting on the fence, not necessarily because they don't have the money, but because they're wondering, okay, are prices going to just keep going up? At some point, the market's going to crash, and and if I hold off long enough, I'll be able to get a great deal on something. What would you tell those people as you're looking at prices right now?
Well, I think for those big ticket items, I think there's, using historical data, can be some indication where, home prices, typically are cyclical. The prices do keep going up and up. Interest rates are going up. And, but I think every individual is going to have to make the choice that's right for them because their particular home, let's say, there's no indication that market value is going to go back down. Mm-hmm. So for those, I think it is important. I know it sounded like you might have had a realtor on earlier. Yes. Make sure to, speak to those people and those experts to see what makes sense for you. But at least home prices do tend to fluctuate. When it comes to things like services of restaurants and clothes and things like that, historically, once prices go up, they don't come back down. Sure, there's sales and promotions and things like that. And, but those are two different magnitudes of spending. So I think you just have to take note of what your own situation is and, make the best decisions that make sense for your budget.
Well, Lisa, it's certainly been a pleasure having you on today. And, when I reached out to you about this topic, it was really cool to learn about the impact that your parents had in this area.
Yes, well, and thank you. And I just want to say if there's anybody that knows Jan and Charlie Wyatt out there, shout out to you guys. They love living in Lafayette. And in fact, it was the 1-year anniversary of my mom's passing just this last Monday. Oh. And so it's been on my heart, the community.
Yeah.
So thank you.
No, thank you so much, Lisa. We really appreciate you taking the time. And I'll say it. Thank you to your parents for all they did for us in this area. I mean, those like you mentioned, with Bayou Vermilion and with Monkus Park and the Farmers Market. I mean, it just great additions to our local community. With the park and all, but obviously with the Bayou Vermilion, I mean, like I said, keeping it clean is so huge, and keeping our area beautiful. And they had such a big impact with all that. So, so thank you. So thank you to you, and thank you to them for doing that.
Oh, well, thank you for having me, Brandon. It was certainly a pleasure.